And I have to say that when I put that against what Mu and I are going to talk about today, our topic seems almost quaint, almost old-fashioned. But I have seen the future, and it still involves people talking to other people, much to the chagrin of my 2 teenage kids. But in a world where people are willing to write 1,000-word essays on Amazon about banana slicers, it doesn't suggest that people are unwilling to give their opinions. It just suggests that the way we talk to them today, they're unwilling to give their opinions to us. And what we really want to talk about is the introduction of new products and new ideas and giving the people what they want, which is concept testing on the consumer's terms. So if we think about it, and I think this is something we all know, traditional concept testing approaches are losing relevance with consumers and marketers. It's not that it's losing relevance in terms of the need to actually identify good new product ideas and introduce them, but in fact, what we're having a problem doing and what's losing relevance is the way we go about talking to them. With consumers, we find, as was mentioned in the previous talk, their attention is more fragmented. We actually know that almost half of consumers are doing something else while they're completing a survey. Not a big surprise if you look at how people spend their lives or even how we spend our lives. From a marketing standpoint, we see the exact same thing, and this is a topic we're going to keep coming back to, which is it's one thing to be able to talk to consumers effectively. Another part of that is we have to be able to translate that into language and into action that marketers can appreciate. But they also view traditional concept testing, the traditional evaluation of new product ideas, as being somewhat old-fashioned, and probably more importantly, is not very realistic. It doesn't reflect the world in which we live today. So while others have shown you their technology, what we're here to share with you today is research on research. Yay. But what we really want to do is talk about what the work we've done to integrate mobile technology that actually allows for more powerful business outcomes than traditional concept testing in a way that better connects with consumers. Consumers here today, consumers of the next generation, and consumers in countries, very much recognizing a lot of what we talked about is occurring in the US, but we need to think about what it means to actually live in a global economy and introduce products worldwide. So what Ipsos did is we took a hard look at every piece of the concept testing equation to try to reimagine what concept testing looks like in the future, very much driven by mobile capabilities. What we're seeing, certainly in the US, and you all have the statistics, is the rise of mobile, but what we're also seeing is countries that are completely skipping the PC revolution and going right to mobile. And we need to be able to talk to consumers on their own terms. And that was really the basis for this R&D. I've been with Ipsos about 13 years, and this is far and away the largest R&D engagement that I've ever seen Ipsos conduct, and certainly that I've ever been personally involved in. We looked across 4 different markets to try to represent different regions of the world. We ended up doing a test that involved, as a final stage, about 96 cells. The truth is, it was a very iterative process that led up to this. And what we really tried to think about was all the different products and categories in which our consumers and our clients participate, so that we could try to reflect those different purchasing dynamics. Because one of the things we're finding in a world where new products seem to be creating categories every single day is we can still learn a lot from categories that have similar dynamics, even if they're not the exact same categories. And what we found as an outcome is really that integrating mobile capabilities creates concept testing research that's more like real life and less like research, increasing its relevance with consumers and with marketers. It increases engagement. We know that marketers painstakingly craft and come up with their new product ideas. And in fact, we needed to create a better way to articulate that idea to consumers. We need to hold people's attention better. As was mentioned in the prior talk, consumer attention span is decreasing. The fact that we're now below the goldfish troubles me to no end, but that's the reality in which we're living. And we need to come up with a way to communicate with them that recognizes that shorter attention span. We need to extend reach. Clearly in the US, we have been relatively PC dominated, and mobile becomes an adjunct to that PC. In other countries, they're entirely mobile dominated, and the PC revolution has been skipped. And finally, we need to make sure that what we do can be translated into action, because I think all of the things we're talking about in terms of the migration to mobile and the different sources of data become interesting, but unless we can do something with them to impact the outcomes that businesses get, we're really not doing our job. So with that, let me turn it over to Mu to take us through some of the R&D results themselves.
Thank you. Hello. So first, let's talk about increasing engagement. So like Brad was saying, all marketers painstakingly craft every word that goes into a concept. It's somebody's baby. At least we're hoping that people are reading them. So we're hoping the level of engagement matches the level of engagement the marketers put into a concept. Is that what's happening? Here's Melanie. Just a couple of years ago, we would say that's the bread and butter of any survey panel. She's in the 30s with kids, primary grocery shopper. We're having problem even with her. So dropout rate is high, data quality dropping. It's just very low level of engagement, not reading a concept through and through. So in our R&D, we looked out different ways of now that mobile is giving this opportunity to reinvent ourselves. What is the best stimulus that would increase the engagement from respondents like Melanie? So on the left-hand side, so people are familiar with this setting, it's a traditional concept. What we did is we spread out the information into 4 screens, each screen with just the right amount of information for a mobile device, and the right amount of information for any promotional video or material that people encounter daily, that you can read in probably 6 or 9 seconds. We come up with something we call swipe concept, which works like this. It's just like viewing videos on their cell phone. Consumer has to swipe their way through to the end. It, in a way, forces them to read the whole thing. And here's the result. We found out that it increases the engagement by quite a bit. So here's the result. A traditional concept, people spend 42 seconds reading through them. And the swipe concept, 68 seconds. That's a 50% increase. They spend 50% more time reading the concept. That's a higher level of engagement. We also find people, we ask them questions after the survey. Which concept did they like better? How was the presentation? How was the ease of reading? The swipe concept wins on every case. So what we found out is that when you have the right stimulus, it can get the engagement level back up. And a side benefit of that actually is that the data quality actually goes up as well, which I'm going to go a little bit more into details. But next, let's look at attention. So we were just talking about the goldfish. Attention span is decreasing. And the problem is, of course, the most prominent with our millennials. Here is a fine example of our millennials in the 20s, live in Pacific Northwest, college educated. She's on the phone all the time. But is she doing surveys? No. Is it that she doesn't have time? She has time. She does all kinds of things on the internet. Is that she doesn't like to give feedbacks to products? No, she gives feedback on everything that she buys online. But she's not doing surveys. To be honest, surveys are clumsy, surveys are wordy. It just doesn't fit into her life anymore. It's just no fun doing surveys. So the survey has to be shorter and it has to be more fun for her to do. So part of the R&D we did is we look at all of these survey measures that everybody is used to and see how we're going to do it in a mobile device that actually gets into the attention spans of a millennial, which is very short. So on the left-hand side, you can see this is a traditional attribute scale questions. How much do you agree on a 5 or 7-point scale on a certain attribute? And usually when you ask this type of questions, you have to ask it twice. You have to ask it for the new thing and what you currently do today. So that's like 2 questions, a prime example of what's not going to fit in a mobile screen. And you're going to turn people off just by looking at it. So we in the R&D, we went through painstakingly a lot of different ways we could do to shorten the survey, but more importantly, making sure that we're still getting the same results, if not better results, from these shorter questionnaires. So I'm just going to show you one of the examples that we have simplified that kind of attribute ratings. It's what we call the slider scale. So it's the same idea, but the scale itself is without fixed scale points in the middle. It's a continuous scale. You put the test product, the new thing, on the left. You put the competitor on the right, and you just ask them to slide. Just if you put a cursor closer to the test product, they like the test product better on that particular attribute, vice versa. So we easily collapse the 2 questions into one, and we're getting exactly the same results. And it's a little bit more engaging and a little more intuitive for somebody like Kim to do. So here's the results. Concept tests, on average, in a traditional sense, on PC is about 15 minutes. So with slider scale and all the other improvements we did, we're able to make that, cut that in half, 50%, to about 7 minutes. What does 7 minutes mean? 7 minutes is about the amount of time that people spend to write an Amazon product review. So now we're back into the attention span of a millennial. And side benefit of that, we actually in the R&D, we noticed a much more significant, less dropout rates from the millennials and other key targets that is hard to get. So we are able to get the attention spans short from the millennials as long as we ask the questions smartly. It's not that they don't want to answer questions. They can. They answer questions. We just need to ask the questions smartly. So lastly, I'm going to talk about the extending reach to global markets. I mean, it's, every company is going after emerging markets. Reach is not really the problem anymore. So just, you know, let's look at this fine gentleman who lives in South Africa. You know, five or 10 years ago, this would be a person that is really hard to reach because he doesn't have a PC at home. His family probably never owned a PC. They jumped directly from, you know, nothing to the mobile world. So now we're reaching them, but that's just start of the problem. We can't just throw a survey to this group of people that we have never talked to before onto the mobile. So let's imagine a typical concept test. We would have tested a concept in 10 different countries, the same concept. And the data is going to come back to us with a very different mix of completion from PC versus mobile. So in America, it might be 80% PC, 20% mobile. And in India, it might be just the other way around. So if the data is not device neutral, you can't just put them side by side and compare them, right? Same thing with the scale, the use of the scale, and the power of discrimination among data. We all know, like as researchers, some countries, the data discriminates more than the other countries. So how do we do this in the device neutral world and make sure that the study comes back to us directly comparable without back-end massaging? So what we found out in the R&D is that stimulus is once again one of the main important contributor to device neutrality. Well, if you have the right stimulus, the data can be neutral between PC and mobile. So I mean, this is a small chart, but we explored many different stimulus that reaches the neutrality on all kinds of devices. And our criteria being the results needs to be consistent between PC and the mobile devices on our key measures. I mean, these are just a few of the examples. I mean, the traditional concept, the conclusion is simple, it's not device neutral. I mean, we are getting significant differences consistently between the two devices. Swipe concept, which I showed you just a bit earlier, actually is the only stimulus that we were able to see a full device neutrality on all of the key measures. So now let's look at data quality. So we all know, let's say in Brazil, if we gave them a 7-point scale, or Mexico, or to a certain extent China, you give them a 5-point scale, they only use 4 and 5. You give them 7-point scale, they only use 6 and 7. So the discriminating power of the same data is different from country to country. And that gives us a lot of trouble when we have to back analyze the data. So in the R&D, what we found out is that if you give them the slider data, which is the one that I was showing earlier, every country uses the slider data very similarly. Everybody is actually using all parts of the slider. So they're not always going to a certain parts of the scale like they used to. The result of that is that we were able to see much better discrimination in the data. So in the gray part is the quote-unquote standard deviation from normalized data we used to get from traditional scales. You can see that countries like Brazil, we're just not getting any deviation at all in the data. With small changes like turning traditional scale to a slider scale, we are seeing that every country is reaching almost the same amount of discrimination. And it's actually even a little bit more for Brazil. So with that, the data is more discriminant. It also mitigates the country differences. it makes it easier for us to say, let's field a survey, let's get 10 countries back, and we can compare the data directly without having to model it heavily. That's very powerful because our marketers are expecting the same timing and cost constraints as we have with developed worlds now when we do the developing country survey. So with the right stimulus and with the right way to ask questions and the right metrics, we're able to get the survey into their timing and cost constraints. So what does it all mean to marketers? I'm going to turn it back to Brad.
Thanks. So part of my role as Chief Operating Officer at Ipsos Marketing US is to do competitive analysis. So I spend a lot of time looking at what is said within our industry, mainly so I can disparage our competitors online anonymously, but also for business reasons too. And the thing I hear most often, or I see most often when I talk to clients and when I look at what our competitors say, is talking about the idea of shorter and faster. And I am a huge proponent of shorter and faster. And yet, I have yet to find a marketer that says, give me shorter, faster, and oh, by the way, it's okay that it's not as insightful and I get less information. So I think a big part of the exercise as we look to appeal to marketers is not how do I deliver less, but in fact, how do I deliver something comparable or preferably more and better? And that really brings us to the last part of this R&D engagement. Because the truth is, unless we improve marketing's perception of research in general and concept testing in particular, whatever we do to improve consumer appeal is really going to be irrelevant. So I think you all recognize the marketers in your midst. Maybe you see a little bit of yourself in this slide, but I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the person next to you, to be clear. But the truth is, marketers' attention spans are just as fragmented as those of consumers. And we really have to deliver research that feels more like real life and less like research to ultimately move the business forward, as Mu was talking about. Bite-sized stimulus, relative, intuitive comparisons, device neutrality. So absolutely mobile is a huge driver of that, but it's about giving consumers what they want on their terms. And sometimes I'm in a mobile mood, and sometimes in a PC mood, and sometimes I don't know what mood I'm in. And it needs to adapt to the consumers the way they want to answer surveys for us. And our R&D really showed that concept testing can deliver what marketers need in a way that is relevant to them. So if I think about what the outcomes we can deliver from this revamped approach to concept testing are, it starts with being able to understand what role an innovation might play within a company's innovation portfolio. Because we know that companies that have a balanced innovation portfolio most likely translate that into a higher share price, because that's how directly innovation translates into outcomes. We know that marketers need to understand what the trial potential of a new product does in market, and as well, whether it's going to be incremental to their business or not. They want to know the drivers behind that trial potential to understand what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. And then ultimately, they want to understand how to improve the messaging, because we've moved into a world that is very iterative, as opposed to the old world where we do something once and it would take 6, 8, 10 weeks, and it either passed or it didn't. It's an iterative world where we try something and then we revamp it quickly and we try it again. And I think that notion of iteration plays into all of this. We know that the attention of marketers is as fragmented as that of consumers. And I think our R&D really shows, and if you have questions about how the analysis is done, Mu is actually the guy, it shows that if you collect the data correctly and you analyze the data correctly, you can actually deliver a more powerful outcome to marketers, because at the end of the day, that's the name of the game, is moving our business forward. It's not data for the sake of data itself. So I want to just quickly close by thinking about how we connect what we're doing now to what comes next. And the truth is, creating more like concept testing that's more like real life and less like research really is the future in terms of increasing its relevance. It creates something that not just marketers that can understand, but really anybody within the organization can understand and use and work with. As Mu talked about, if done correctly, we know that we can increase engagement with consumers, and the swipe stimulus actually increases by about 50% the time consumers spend looking at your new product ideas. The slider scales allow us to hold attention for the right amount of time. Knowing that attention spans are shrinking, we're able to reduce the survey length by about 50%. We're able to deliver more discrimination, so you'll have a better understanding of the power of your ideas compared to other things in the marketplace. And ultimately, traditional approaches deliver about 50% less discrimination than what this new approach delivers. And we're able to deliver something that actually goes beyond what companies have traditionally delivered from a concept test or an idea test by really being able to move the needle with marketers as well. And to me, that ability to do those things with consumers and with marketers is really what gives people what they want, and it represents concept testing on the consumer's own terms. So, thank you.